The cell
We have
was
to
3
move,
meters on
now.
each side.
I am with you.
Reinforced
Stay
alloy
close.
walls.
Always.
A single
We have
force
to
field
move,
barrier
now.
humming
I am
across
with
the
you.
entrance,
Stay close.
casting everything in
Always.
pale blue light. Lyra's consciousness clawed its way back through layers of sedative fog, her twin hearts hammering in irregular rhythm against her ribs. She didn't panic. Garrett had trained her better than that. Her bioluminescent markings pulsed once, involuntary, a flash of indigo fear before she forced them to dim. Control, always control. She cataloged her situation with the methodical precision her fiancé had drilled into her over 3 years of what he'd called just-in-case training. The kind of training a retired ghost operative gives to the woman he loves when he knows the galaxy isn't always kind to those who dare to be different. The air tasted wrong. Too much sulfur, not enough oxygen. Her suit's environmental filters had been stripped away. They had left her the ceremonial robes she'd been wearing during the attack. Pale fabric now stained with dust and what might have been her yin blood. A small mercy, or perhaps an oversight. Pirates rarely understood the subtleties of psychological warfare. Lyra pressed her palm against the wall. Cold. The ship's engines thrummed through the metal, a low frequency she felt more than heard. They were moving, fast. She closed her eyes and reached out with her empathetic sense. That gift of the Niththeris people that let her perceive the emotional resonance of living beings within a 40-meter radius. 2 guards outside her cell, their psychic signatures bloomed in her mind like colored smoke. The first was orange-red, aggressive dominance wrapped around a core of muddy brown fear. Forearmed from the weight distribution in his stance, Kriath, most likely. The second signature, jangled with nervous yellow anxiety, serpentine body language, constant motion. Voss. Lyra opened her eyes. The attack on Montana Research Outpost Sierra 9 replayed behind her eyelids whether she wanted it to or not. 6 hours ago, no, 7 now, she'd lost time to the sedative. They'd come at dawn. 8 raiders in assault configuration, military-grade suppression foam coating the communications array before the first alarm even sounded. Lyra had been in the greenhouse, checking overnight growth on the empathetic resonance flora, when the lights died. Garrett's voice had cut through the darkness, calm and absolute. Lyra, north exit, now. She'd run, but Garrett hadn't followed. She'd look back to see him moving the opposite direction, drawing the raiders away from her position. 7 of them converging on his location. 1 circling to cut off her escape. The fight had been brief and brutal. Garrett Aldrich, 35 years old, 190 pounds of controlled violence wrapped in the skin of a research station botanist. He'd dropped 3 raiders before they'd adapted, switched from capture to suppress, overwhelmed him with numbers and neural stunners. Lyra had tried to help, had raised the plasma torch she'd been carrying like a weapon. The raider behind her had laughed, a chittering sound through his helmet speakers, and fired the stunner before she could turn. The last thing she'd seen was Garrett on his knees, blood streaming from a cut above his eye, shouting something she couldn't hear over the ringing in her ears. Remember what I taught you? Or maybe she'd imagined that part. Maybe it was just what she wanted to hear. Lyra shook her head, forced herself back to the present. Grief was a luxury she couldn't afford. Garrett was alive. She'd known him long enough to understand that neural stunners wouldn't keep him down for long, and the raiders had been wearing body armor rated for human weapons. They'd hurt him, but they hadn't killed him, which meant he was coming. He was tracking. He was hunting. But she couldn't wait for rescue. That wasn't how Garrett had trained her. She stood slowly, testing her balance. The sedative had mostly worn off, leaving only a faint headache and cottonmouth. Her muscles responded normally. No broken bones, no serious injuries beyond bruises forming along her left side, where she'd hit the deck when they'd stunned her. Lyra moved to the force field barrier, careful not to touch it. The energy would burn, not kill, but pain was information and she needed to stay sharp. Beyond the barrier, a corridor stretched in both directions. Amber emergency lighting, utilitarian design. This was a working ship, not military, but retrofitted for violence. Scourge fleet configuration, if she had to guess. The guards came into view. Krell, her mind named the Kriath automatically. Massive, four-armed chitinous plating across his shoulders and back. He carried himself with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never lost a physical confrontation. Beside him, the Voss she mentally tagged as Vex, Smaller, serpentine, scales rippling with barely suppressed nervous energy. He kept glancing at his larger partner, measuring, assessing, looking for approval he'd never quite receive. Hierarchy, insecurity, fault lines. Lyra settled into meditation pose on the cell's floor, positioning herself where both guards could see her clearly, not cowering in the corner, not attempting escape, just sitting, calm, in control. The first rule of psychological warfare Garrett had taught her. Make them wonder what you know that they don't. Her markings began to glow in a slow, steady rhythm. To most species, the patterns were simply beautiful, a harmless, natural phenomenon of Nytheris biology. But Garrett had helped her understand what her own people's scholars had documented centuries ago. The patterns generated subtle harmonic frequencies, subsonic vibrations that resonated with the limbic systems of any brain complex enough to process emotion. Lyra shifted her internal rhythm to the frequency that amplified existing anxieties. 17 hertz, the frequency of fear, not enough to cause it outright, but enough to feed what was already there, nurture it, let it grow like mold in darkness. Vex was the first to react. His scales rippled, a sign of agitation in his species. He glanced at Krell, then away, then back again. Doubt beginning to bloom. Does the Kreath respect me? Does he laugh at my nervousness when I'm not looking? Lyra pushed gently, not creating emotion, just amplifying. Finding what was already there and feeding it. The key was patience. Garrett's voice in her memory. Psychological warfare isn't about the first strike. It's about the long game. Make them defeat themselves. She'd been an academic before meeting Garrett, a scholar of empathetic resonance, studying the emotional patterns of different species, mapping how feelings transferred and transformed across cultural boundaries. She'd written her doctoral thesis on human emotional complexity, that paradox of a species capable of creating breathtaking beauty and unfathomable horror with equal facility. Then she'd met Garrett Aldrich at an academic conference on Earth, a veteran-turned-researcher presenting a paper on trauma response in former soldiers. She'd sensed the contradictions in him immediately. Surface calm wrapped around something vast and terrible. A capacity for violence so profound it had its own gravity. She should have been terrified. Instead, she'd fallen in love. Their third date, he'd told her the truth. About the Ghost program, about the things he'd done in the name of Terran security, about the missions that didn't officially exist, the ships he'd infiltrated, the targets he'd eliminated. He'd expected revulsion. She'd taken his scarred hands in her own and said the words that would change both their lives. The past is a country we've already left. What matters is where we're going. They'd been going toward forever, toward marriage, toward a life that proved love could bridge any difference. Then 6 months ago, Garrett had started training her. Just in case, he'd said, the galaxy isn't always kind to people who choose their own path. Combat basics, hand to hand. How to move through confined spaces. How to assess tactical situations. How to use her empathetic abilities as a weapon instead of just a research tool. He'd been gentle, patient, professional, never pushing too hard, always explaining the why behind every technique. You're not training to be a soldier, he'd told her. You're training to survive long enough for help to arrive. And if help doesn't arrive, you're training to make sure they regret ever touching you. Lyra watched Vex's scales ripple again. Watched Krell's hand drift toward his weapon, responding to his partner's agitation without understanding why. The seeds were planted. Now they just needed time to grow. She needed information. Ship layout, crew complement, destination, timeline. Her cell had no visible controls, but there were environmental sensors in the ceiling, air recyclers in the walls. Basic infrastructure. If she could access them, even minimally, she could begin to map the ship's systems. A sound drew her attention, footsteps, heavy boots on deck plating. A third figure appeared at the end of the corridor. Captain, from the way the guard straightened. Massive even by Kreath standards, standing nearly 3 meters tall, wearing a patchwork of armor pieces from a dozen different military forces. Trophy kills or stolen equipment. The captain stopped at her cell, studying her with 4 yellow eyes. The package, he said in trade standard, his voice a rumbling bass. Intact? Yes, Captain Thrace, Krell responded. Nervous now. Different kind of fear. fear of disappointing authority. Thrace leaned closer to the force field. Scholar Lyra of Netheris, do you know why you're here? Lyra met his gaze without flinching. She'd learned from watching Garrett. Never show fear to predators. I can guess. Someone paid you to take me. The question is who and why. Thrace's mandibles clicked, the Kreath equivalent of a smile. Smart. Your reputation said as much. A shame, really. Under different circumstances, I'd enjoy a conversation about your research. Empathetic resonance patterns across species. Fascinating work. You've read my papers? I read everything about my cargo. Know what you're worth, know how to keep you safe. That's how you survive in this business. He gestured to the cell. Comfortable enough? I'm not a monster. The client wants you alive and unharmed. I intend to deliver exactly that. How considerate. And after delivery, Thrace's mandibles clicked again. Not my concern, I'm just transport. Transport to where? Classified. Will arrive in 67 hours. Until then, sit tight. Don't cause problems. My crew has orders not to harm you, but accidents happen on ships. He turned to leave, paused. One more thing. Your fiancé, the human, Garrett Aldrich, former ghost operative. I looked into his record. Lyra's heart skipped. She kept her expression neutral. Impressive kill count, Thrace continued, if even half the stories are true. But he's one man, and we've got a 12-hour head start running dark through the Denali fields. Even if he tracks us, which I doubt, we'll be long and gone before he arrives. So don't get your hopes up for rescue. This isn't a story. The hero doesn't always arrive in time. He walked away. Krell and Vex relaxed fractionally. Lyra waited until Thrace's footsteps faded, then let herself smile. The captain had just given her 3 critical pieces of information. 67 hours to destination, location somewhere in or beyond the Denali fields. And most importantly, he was afraid Garrett might track them, which meant Garrett was alive and free. She closed her eyes and sent out a silent thought into the void, knowing it was irrational, knowing empathetic resonance didn't work across vast distances, but needing to believe anyway. I'm okay. I'm fighting. Come find me when you can, but don't rush. I'll be ready. Time to begin phase 2. Lyra shifted her position slightly, angling herself toward the wall where she'd noticed a data port during her initial survey. Too high to reach from sitting, but ships like this were built modular. Standard Scourge fleet configuration meant the environmental controls would be networked, accessible from multiple points. She'd been a scholar for most of her life. Research was about making connections, finding patterns in seemingly unrelated data. Garrett had taught her that the same skills applied to infiltration. Every system had patterns. Every network had vulnerabilities. You just had to be patient enough to find them. The cell's lighting fixture was anchored to the ceiling with standard bolts, 4 of them. If she could work one loose, she'd have a tool. Not much of one, but enough to access the data port, interface with the environmental systems, begin the real work. But that was a problem for later. First, she needed to continue breaking down her guards. Lyra resumed her meditation pose, but this time she adjusted her bioluminescent frequency to something more aggressive. Still subsonic, still barely perceptible, but carrying a different message. Paranoia, the sense of being watched, of threats in the shadows. Krell was the first to react. His secondary arms twitched, hands moving to weapons he wasn't holding. His head swiveled, scanning the corridor for threats that didn't exist. "Do you feel that?" he muttered. "Feel what?" Vex hissed, but his own body language betrayed him. Scales rippling, eyes darting. Like something's watching. "There's nothing there, just the prisoner." "I know what I feel." The argument was small, meaningless, but it was a crack in their unity. Lyra filed it away. Every crack was leverage. The ship shuddered slightly. Course correction or FTL transition, she couldn't tell from inside the cell. But the vibration gave her an idea. If she could time her empathetic pulses to the ship's natural rhythms, mask her manipulation in the background noise, she could work longer without the guards consciously noticing. Hours passed. Lyra worked in silence, pulsing suggestions, amplifying fears, planting doubts. The guards rotated shifts, new faces, but the same basic patterns. Dominance and submission, aggression and anxiety. She read them all, cataloged their weaknesses, began the slow work of erosion. Then 12 hours into her captivity, something changed. A vibration in the air circulation. Not the normal hum of environmental processors. Something deliberate. A pattern. Lyra's breath caught. She focused, filtering out the background noise, isolating the signal. Pressure modulation in the ventilation system. Rhythmic, intentional, Morse code. Garrett had taught her during one of their training sessions, laughing about how it was ancient Earth technology, practically primitive, but sometimes the older ways work best because nobody expected them. The pattern resolved in her mind. STATUSQUESTIONMARK. Status? Lyra's markings flared brilliant white before she could control it. Garrett was here, on the ship. Somehow, impossibly, he'd tracked them across 12 light years and infiltrated a moving vessel. Krell noticed the light surge. Hey, what are you doing? Lyra forced herself calm, her skin dimmed back to baseline. Nothing, just a dream. I fell asleep. Didn't look like sleeping. Do you know much about Nithera's physiology? She kept her voice level. Our bioluminescence responds to REM sleep. Involuntary response. I can't control it any more than you can control your heartbeat. Krell grunted, unconvinced but lacking evidence to dispute her. He turned back to scanning the corridor. Lyra waited 3 full minutes, counting her heartbeats, then shifted her radiance to a specific pattern. Infrared spectrum, wavelength 940 nanometers. Invisible to most species, but Garrett's tactical suit would have sensors that could detect it. She pulsed out a message in the same code. EXECUTINGPLANA period. GUARDSBREAKING period NEED CHEMATICS. Executing Plan A. Guards breaking. Need schematics. The response came 90 seconds later. Barely perceptible pressure shifts. SENDINGNOW period. RUSTYOURTRAINING. Sending now. Trust your training. Lyra closed her eyes and reached out with her empathetic sense, mapping the emotional landscape of the ship. 32 distinct signatures. Crews scattered across multiple decks, most concentrated in the common areas. Bridge, engine room, crew quarters. But there was something else, a gap in the pattern. A cold spot where emotions should be, but weren't. Garrett's ghost training. She'd felt it before during their sparring sessions. He could suppress his emotional signature almost completely, become a void that her empathetic sense slid past without registering. It had terrified her the first time, seeing the man she loved become something absent, something that registered as less alive than the furniture. Now that void was moving through the ship's ventilation system, a predator in the walls. The environmental controls flickered once, just a momentary brownout that Krell and Vex probably attributed to normal ship operations. But Lyra knew better. Garrett was in the system. 30 seconds later, the data port in her cell's wall began displaying a schematic. Ship layout, deck plans, crew positions. Lyra memorized it all, her academic training letting her absorb the information in seconds. Ravager's hand, modified freighter, 3 main decks. Bridge on top level, sealed and reinforced. Engineering and cargo below. Her cell was on the middle deck. Prisoner transport section. Close to the bridge for easy transfer when they reached their destination. 64 hours remaining to destination. The schematic disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, Garrett covering his tracks. But Lyra had what she needed. She analyzed the layout. 32 crew for a ship this size meant they were running lean. Probably couldn't afford a full complement. That meant vulnerabilities, long shifts, fatigue, corners cut on maintenance and security. The bridge had override controls for her cell. That was the target, but she couldn't reach it alone, couldn't fight through 32 crew members even with Garrett's training. She needed them divided, scattered, uncertain. She needed them to defeat themselves. Lyra stood and moved to the cell's air recycler, the motion drawing Krell's attention but not his alarm. She was just a prisoner stretching her legs. Nothing threatening, she positioned herself where her breath would be pulled into the recycler's intake, then began to hum. Not loud enough for the guards to hear consciously. just a subsonic vibration that the recycler would carry through the ventilation system, spreading to every compartment the environmental controls serviced. The frequency that induced unease, that made skin crawl and hearts race without apparent cause. The frequency that whispered in the back of evolved brains. Something is wrong. Danger is near. Trust no one. Within 20 minutes, the first crew member appeared in the medical bay. Lyra couldn't see it, but she could sense the emotional signature. Anxiety, confusion. The ship's doctor running scans, finding nothing wrong. 30 minutes, 2 more crew members. Same symptoms. Krell shifted uncomfortably. Is it just me, or does something feel off? Vex's scales rippled constantly now. I've been feeling it for hours, like something's wrong with the ship. Should we report it? Report what? That we have a bad feeling? Lyra maintained her humming, kept her expression serene. In her mind, she could feel Garrett's presence in the walls, feel him moving through access tunnels and maintenance shafts, leaving small surprises. A magnetic anomaly here that would make weapons malfunction. An electromagnetic pulse generator there that would corrupt personal data pads. A pheromone synthesizer calibrated to produce the scent signature of decay. They were a team. They had always been a team. And these pirates had made the critical mistake of assuming she was just a scholar and he was just a researcher. They were about to learn what happened when you underestimated the woman a ghost operative loved enough to train. And they were going to learn it the hard way. Garrett Aldrich had been inside the Ravager's hand for 14 hours, and the crew was beginning to unravel. The exhaust manifold had been tight, even for someone trained to infiltrate spaces designed to kill intruders. The metal had still been warm from the engines, radiating heat that would have cooked most species alive. But former ghost operatives trained in environments that made hell look comfortable. 48 degrees Celsius was unpleasant, not impossible. Now he moved through the ventilation system like smoke through a cage, his tactical suit's thermal regulators keeping him invisible to the ship's heat sensors, his neural interface whispering into the ship's environmental controls like a digital ghost. Every junction he passed, he left small modifications. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would trigger alerts. Just subtle degradations that would compound over hours into a crescendo of wrongness. A pressure sensor reading 0.3% off specification. A temperature gauge drifting half a degree. A lighting circuit developing an intermittent flicker that would strobe at exactly 17 hertz when it failed. The frequency of fear. Garrett paused at an access junction, his heads-up display showing Lyra's cell 2 decks above. Her biosignature pulsed steady on his sensors. Elevated heart rate, but controlled. She was managing her stress, staying operational. Good. He'd trained her to compartmentalize, to lock fear away in a box and deal with it after the crisis passed. He'd also trained her to fight dirty. Through the ship's internal sensors, he watched her work. The way she'd positioned herself near the air recycler, the way her skin glowed in patterns that looked random to anyone who didn't know better. She was conducting psychological warfare from inside a cell, using the ship's own environmental systems to spread unease through the crew like a virus. Garrett allowed himself a moment of pride. 3 years ago, Lyra had been a scholar who flinched at raised voices. Now she was weaponizing empathetic resonance theory against pirates who'd made the mistake of thinking academic meant harmless. His neural interface chimed softly. Incoming data from the ship's main computer. He'd inserted a worm into the system during his initial breach, a piece of code that looked like normal background processes but was actually siphoning information directly to his tactical display. Crew manifest, 32 beings, species breakdown, duty rotations, quarters assignments, and buried in the encrypted files, something that made Garrett's blood run cold. Contract details. He pulled the file, his implant breaking the encryption in seconds. The Scourge fleet used military-grade security, but it was 15 years out of date. Garrett had been cracking systems like this when these pirates were still in whatever passed for grade school on their homeworlds. The contract loaded. Client designation, Elder Magistrate Vorn, Niththeris Preservation Circle. Acquisition target, Scholar Lyra, to be delivered alive and unharmed to coordinates in the Tarsus sector. Payment, 500,000 Galactic credits on delivery. Execution protocol authorized upon transfer. Garrett read the last line 3 times, his pulse hammering against the ghost training that kept his hands steady and his breathing controlled. They were going to kill her, not ransom her, not hold her for political leverage, execute her as a statement, and the client was Nitharus, Lyra's own people. He forced himself to think tactically. Emotional responses got people killed. The Ghost didn't have emotions during operations. The Ghost had objectives and obstacles and acceptable risk parameters. But Garrett Aldrich, the man who loved Lyra with a ferocity that sometimes frightened him, wanted to paint the corridors with the blood of everyone aboard this ship. He breathed, counted to 10, let the rage settle into something colder and more useful. The file contained a timeline. Delivery in 63 hours, 14 minutes. Except there was a secondary clause he almost missed. Contingency extraction. If primary timeline compromised, standby team on alert. Can deploy within 18 hours of activation signal. 18 hours. If something went wrong with the primary plan, they had a backup that could arrive in less than a day. Garrett transmitted the information to Lyra via pressure modulation, encoding the critical details. She needed to know what they were facing, needed to understand the stakes had just escalated from kidnapping to premeditated murder. Her response came back in infrared patterns, detectable only by his suit's sensors. Understood. Accelerate timeline. Break them faster. Garrett smiled in the darkness of the ventilation shaft. That was his Lyra. No panic, no despair, just immediate tactical adaptation. He consulted his mental map of the ship. The crew was starting to fracture under the combined pressure of Lyra's empathetic manipulation and his environmental sabotage. 3 crew members had visited the medical bay in the last hour, all complaining of anxiety and nausea. The ship's doctor, a methodical Koran named Kess, had run full diagnostics and found nothing wrong. That was more frightening than finding a pathogen. An enemy you couldn't identify was an enemy that could be anywhere, anything. Garrett accessed the ship's environmental controls again, this time targeting the crew quarters. He dropped the temperature 3 degrees. Not enough to trigger alarms, just enough to make sleep uncomfortable. Then he introduced a subsonic pulse into the ventilation, too low for conscious perception, but perfectly calibrated to disrupt REM cycles. Sleep deprivation was a weapon. Deprived the brain of rest, and judgment failed. Paranoia flourished. Unity dissolved into suspicion and blame. He moved deeper into the ship's infrastructure, heading toward the cargo bay. According to the schematics, that's where they'd stored Lyra's personal effects. He needed to see what they'd taken, what they'd left behind. Every detail was intelligence. The cargo bay was massive, designed to haul freight across multiple star systems. Crates were stacked in neat rows, labeled in a dozen different languages. Stolen goods, probably. Medical supplies, research equipment, technology that had fallen off trucks across half the sector. And in the corner, a single container marked with Nitharus glyphs. Garrett dropped from the ventilation shaft, landing in silence on the deck plating. His movements were economical, precise, the muscle memory of 10,000 training hours. He approached the container, checked for alarms, found none. These pirates were professionals at theft, amateurs at security. Inside the container, Lyra's belongings, her research tablets wiped clean of data, her ceremonial robes folded with surprising care, personal items from their shared quarters at the Montana outpost, and something that made Garrett's chest tighten, the holographic emitter he'd given her on their first anniversary. Small, palm-sized, containing a recording of him proposing on the rim of Glacier National Park at sunset. The mountains behind them painted gold and crimson. They'd kept it. These bastards had ransacked a research station, stunned him unconscious, kidnapped the woman he loved, and they'd carefully preserved a holographic memory of their engagement. Garrett closed his eyes, breathed. When he opened them again, the ghost was back in control. He photographed everything with his neural interface, then carefully restored the container to exactly how he'd found it. No trace of his presence, no evidence of intrusion. He climbed back into the ventilation system and continued his work. 2 decks above, Lyra felt the shift in Garrett's psychic void. It had gone from cold absence to something sharper, more focused. Rage compressed into a diamond-hard point. Something had happened, something that had pushed him closer to the edge. She couldn't ask. Communication was limited to brief, encoded pulses. But she trusted him. trusted that whatever he'd found, he'd tell her when the time was right. For now, she had her own work. The guards outside her cell had changed shifts twice since she'd started her psychological assault. Each rotation brought new faces, but the pattern was always the same: dominant and submissive, predator and prey. She read their empathetic signatures like books written in colors only she could see. The current pair was particularly interesting. Vex, the Voss with nervous energy that crackled like static electricity. And Krell, the massive Kreath she'd been working on since the beginning. Krell's confidence had eroded over the past 14 hours. His emotional resonance, once pure aggressive orange, now had threads of brown fear woven through it. Something was wrong with the ship. He could feel it. His instincts screamed danger, but there was nothing to fight, nothing to defend against, just a creeping sense that the walls were watching. Lyra shifted her light patterns to a new frequency. This one was subtle, designed to amplify existing paranoia. She watched Krell's body language change, shoulders hunching, secondary arms twitching, head swiveling to track threats that didn't exist. "Do you hear that?" Krell muttered. Vex's scales rippled. "Hear what?" "Like whispering. In the walls." "There's nothing in the walls." "I know what I hear." Lyra maintained her serene expression, her meditation pose. Inside, she was cataloging the breakdown. Krell was close to cracking. Maybe another hour. Maybe less if she pushed harder. But pushing too hard risked exposure. If they realized she was the source of their discomfort, they'd sedate her, isolate her, remove her ability to manipulate. Patience was key. The ship shuddered, a minor course correction, or maybe FTL turbulence. But Krell nearly jumped out of his chitin plating, all four hands reaching for weapons. "Easy," Vex hissed. "It's just the ship." "Nothing about this is just the ship." Krell's voice carried an edge of hysteria. "The temperature's wrong, the lights flicker, people are getting sick, and now the walls are whispering. You need to report to medical." "So they can tell me nothing's wrong? Like they told the others?" Vex backed away slightly, space between partners. Trust fracturing. Lyra filed it away. When the time came to move, she'd exploit that fracture. By hour 16, the psychological warfare had reached critical mass. Garrett continued his sabotage, each act small enough to avoid detection, but cumulatively devastating. He corrupted personal data pads, introducing errors that made crew members question their own records. He adjusted the galley's food synthesizers to produce meals that tasted slightly off, not enough to trigger alerts, but enough to add to the general sense of wrongness. He even hacked the recreation systems, introducing subliminal messages into the entertainment feeds. "You are not safe. Your crewmates are lying. The ship is dying." By hour 18, the crew was starting to unravel. Garrett watched through internal sensors as arguments broke out in the common areas. A Corin engineer named Rax accused his bunkmate of stealing personal items. The bunkmate, a boss named Shen, responded with accusations of sabotage, pushing, shoving, other crew members pulling them apart. Captain Thrace's voice boomed over the ship's intercom. "All crew, this is the captain. We've got 18 hours until we make the drop. I don't know what's gotten into you people, but I want it to stop. We're professionals. Act like it." 18 hours. The timeline had compressed. Garrett processed the implication. They were accelerating the delivery schedule, probably because of the crew's deteriorating cohesion. Get rid of the package, collect the payment, get out before whatever was wrong with the ship got worse, which meant he and Lyra had 18 hours to execute their plan. He transmitted the updated timeline to Lyra. Her response was immediate. "Understood. Initiating Phase 2. Garrett smiled grimly. Phase 2 was the part where they stopped being subtle. Lyra had been waiting for this moment. She'd spent 16 hours breaking down her guards psychologically, turning the ship's own crew into an asset. Now it was time to exploit the chaos. She stood and moved to the force field barrier, allowing her markings to flare bright enough to get Krell's attention. "Guard, I need to speak with your captain." Krell's four eyes narrowed. "Sit down. I have information he needs, about the contract, about who hired you." "The captain doesn't take requests from cargo." Lyra shifted her tone, injecting urgency. "The client is planning to kill you, all of you, after the transfer." "I can prove it," Vex hissed, scales rippling. She's lying. Am I? Think about it. You deliver me to a Netheris diplomatic vessel. I'm executed for the crime of loving a human. Do you really think they'll let pirates live who witnessed a political assassination? You're not witnesses. You're loose ends. Krell hesitated. Lyra could see the doubt blooming in his emotional texture. How do you know this? Because I know who hired you. Elder Magistrate Vorn of the Preservation Circle. My uncle. The last word hung in the air. Krell and Vex exchanged glances. Your own family ordered the hit? Vex asked. My own family thinks I'm a traitor for choosing love over politics. Lyra let her skin pulse sadness, genuine emotion she didn't have to fake. They're going to kill me, and they're going to kill anyone who knows about it. That includes you. Krell's hand moved to his communication device. I'm reporting this. Good. Report it. Ask your captain if he's read the full contract. Ask him if there's a contingency clause about the witness elimination. The communication went through, 30 seconds of muffled conversation. Then Krell's expression changed. His psychic signature spiked with fear, bright and hot. He cut the connection and looked at Vex. The captain wants to see her. Is she right? Vex's voice was barely a whisper. I don't know, but the captain's scared. I've never heard him scared before. They deactivated the force field. Krell grabbed Lyra's arm, not gently but not violent either. Escort, not assault. They marched her through the corridors toward the bridge, Vex trailing behind with his weapon drawn but uncertain. Garrett tracked their progress through the ship's sensors. This was the gamble. Lyra was betting that Captain Thrace would rather negotiate than deliver her to certain death, that his survival instinct would override his professional pride. If she was wrong, she just walked into a room full of armed pirates with no backup. But she wasn't wrong. Garrett had spent 3 years teaching her how to read people, how to assess motivations, how to find the lever that would move even the most stubborn obstacle. And the lever for pirates was always the same: self-preservation. The bridge of the Ravager's hand was a utilitarian space, all function and no aesthetics. Monitors covered every wall, displaying ship systems, navigation data, external sensors. Captain Thrace stood in the center, all 3 meters of him radiating barely controlled fury. Explain, he growled. The Krell pushes Lyra forward. Explain how you know about contingency clauses in a contract you've never seen. Lyra met his gaze. Because my fiancé is aboard your ship, has been for the last 18 hours, and he's very good at accessing information people think is secure. The bridge went silent, every crew member staring at her. Impossible, Thrace said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? The environmental malfunctions and the crew anxiety? The feeling that something's wrong with your ship? That's not mechanical failure. That's psychological warfare. Ghost operative standard technique. He's been in your systems, in your walls, in your heads since shortly after you grabbed me. Thrace's mandibles clicked rapidly, the Kreath equivalent of stammering. Even if that were true, even if there was someone aboard, he's one man against 32 crew. He's a ghost. One is enough, but he doesn't need to kill anyone. He just needs to keep you distracted while I prove what I'm saying. Lyra gestured to the command console. Pull up your contract, the encrypted files, look for the contingency protocols. Thrace hesitated, then moved to the console. His claws flew over the controls, navigating through security layers. The file appeared on the main display. Contract details, payment structure, delivery coordinates, and at the bottom, in a subsection most people wouldn't read, witness elimination protocol. Upon successful transfer of package, all transport crew will be terminated to ensure operational security. Payment to be transferred to designated accounts prior to elimination. The bridge crew recoiled, verbal outbursts, weapons drawn, pointing at each other, at Thrace, at Lyra, chaos erupting. They were going to pay us and then kill us? Someone shouted. This is a setup. We're dead either way. Thrace raised all 4 arms. Everyone calm down. We need to think this through. Think what through? That was Rax, the Quarian engineer Garrett had been psychologically targeting. We're already dead. The moment we took this job, we were dead. Lyra spoke into the chaos, her voice calm and clear. You don't have to be. There's another option. All eyes turned to her. Help me. Release me. Let me and my fiancé transmit evidence of this conspiracy to the Galactic Council. You'll be witnesses, not conspirators. Reduced charges, maybe immunity if you cooperate fully, but if you deliver me to that diplomatic vessel, if you complete this contract, you're accessories to political assassination and your own murders. Thrace's emotional signature was a storm of conflicting impulses. Pride warring with fear. Professional reputation versus survival instinct. What guarantee do we have? He asked finally. My word, and his. Lyra gestured to the ceiling. Garrett, you can stop hiding now. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Thrace activated ship-wide lockdown protocol. All hands to stations. Seal all decks. I want... The alarm cut him off. Not the soft chime of standard alerts, but the screaming klaxon of catastrophic hull failure. Red emergency lighting flooded the bridge. Automated systems bellowed warnings in multiple languages. Hull breach detected. Deck 3. Section 7. Atmosphere venting. All personnel evacuate affected areas. Thrace's 4 eyes went wide. Venting? That's impossible. We're not even in combat. His crew scattered, training overriding panic. 28 bodies scrambling toward Deck 3, emergency kits grabbed from lockers. Bulkhead doors sealing behind them in waves of pressurized safety. The bridge emptied in 90 seconds. Only Thrace and 3 essential crew remained, staring at sensor readouts that showed nothing. No breach, no pressure loss, no damage. False alarm, his navigator whispered. Thrace's mandibles clicked in dawning horror. No, not false, deliberate. He turned toward the empty corridors. The ghost, he triggered it, scattered my crew, made us vulnerable. And in that moment of realization, the ventilation grate above the bridge fell away with a clang. Garrett dropped through the opening. He landed in the center of the bridge, tactical suit still active, weapons visible but not drawn. The remaining crew members' weapons tracked him instantly, half a dozen guns pointed at his chest. He ignored them, walked calmly to Lyra's side. Captain Thrace, Garrett said, his voice carrying the flat affect of ghost operational mode. I've been aboard your ship for 18 hours. I've had 23 opportunities to kill you, 67 opportunities to sabotage critical systems. I took none of them because my fiancée asked me to show restraint. She believes you're not evil, just people making a living in a difficult galaxy. I'm inclined to trust her judgment. But understand this. Garrett's tone dropped to something colder. If you harm her, if you deliver her to the people who want her dead, if you so much as make her uncomfortable for the next 17 hours, I will demonstrate exactly why the Ghost program had a 98% mission success rate. And you will learn that there are things in this universe more terrifying than political assassination. The silence on the bridge was absolute. Thrace looked at Lyra, at Garrett, at his crew, at the contract still displayed on the main screen, the witness elimination protocol highlighted in red. What do you need? He asked quietly. Bridge communications access, Lyra said. We transmit the evidence, Galactic Council, media networks, diplomatic channels, everything. By the time the Ninth Thuris diplomatic vessel arrives, they'll be sailing into a system swarming with Council security. And my crew? Detained for testimony, but alive. Free eventually if they cooperate. Thrace was silent for a long moment. Then he gestured to the communications console. Do it. Garrett moved to the console, his neural interface diving deep into the ship's systems. Lyra stood beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. Support. Partnership. The way they'd always worked. I found something else, Garrett said quietly, too low for the others to hear. In your personal effects, they kept our engagement hologram. Lyra's bioluminescence pulsed surprised warmth. They did? Carefully preserved, I think maybe these pirates aren't as heartless as they pretend. Or maybe they just recognize love when they see it. Garrett's fingers flew over the controls, assembling the data packet. Contract details, payment trails, witness elimination protocol, and the piece of information he'd uncovered in the deepest encrypted files. Financial records showing Elder Magistrate Vorn had embezzled over 2 million credits from the Preservation Circle's funds, using the political extremism as cover for personal enrichment. Your uncle, Garrett said. He's not just a zealot, he's a thief. That's why he wants you dead. Your research into empathetic resonance patterns, You were also studying Nithera's organizational psychology. You were close to discovering his embezzlement. Lyra's skin flickered through complex emotions: betrayal, anger, sadness. He destroyed our lives to cover his crimes. He tried, but we're still here, and we're about to destroy him. Garrett hit the transmission key. The data packet compressed, encrypted with Galactic Council authentication protocols, and fired across every available channel: emergency frequencies, diplomatic networks, media feeds. Within 30 seconds, it would be in the hands of 1,000 different organizations across 50 star systems. By the time Elder Magistrate Vorn's diplomatic vessel arrived, the galaxy would be watching. Done, Garrett said. He turned to Thrace. Council security will arrive in approximately 90 minutes. I recommend you make yourselves comfortable and practice your statements. The more cooperative you are, the better this goes for everyone. Thrace nodded slowly. And you too? We wait, Lyra said, together, like we should have been all along. Garrett took her hand, their fingers intertwined, human warmth and Nithera's cool. Two different species, two different worlds. One love stronger than all the forces that tried to tear them apart. In the corner of the bridge, a monitor chimed. Incoming transmission. Priority diplomatic channel. Thrace activated it. A Nithera's face appeared on screen, bioluminescent markings pulsing angry red. Older, authoritative, features that bore a striking resemblance to Lyra. This is Elder Magistrate Vorn of the Nithera's Preservation Circle, the figure said. I'm en route to collect the package. Prepare for immediate transfer upon my arrival in 17 hours. Lyra stepped into the camera's view. Hello, Uncle. I've been expecting you. Vorn's bioluminescence stuttered shock. Lyra, how are you? Free because I'm not the helpless scholar you remember. Because the man you dismissed as human contamination taught me to fight, to think strategically, to survive. She leaned closer to the camera. And because I know about the embezzlement, about the 2 million credits you stole, about how you've been using the Preservation Circle as your personal bank while preaching about cultural purity. Vorn's psychic signature, even filtered through the transmission, radiated panic. You have no proof. I have all the proof. I just transmitted it to the Galactic Council, along with evidence of your assassination contract. By the time you arrive here, you won't be collecting a package. You'll be surrendering to Council security. And you'll spend the rest of your life in prison, Uncle. Not for extremism, for theft, for corruption, for being exactly the kind of hypocrite you always accused others of being. You've condemned yourself, Vorn hissed. You've betrayed our people for a human. I've exposed a criminal for what he is, and I've proven that love transcends your narrow definition of acceptable behavior. Lyra's voice hardened. You thought you could kill me quietly. Make an example. Terrify others who might dare to choose their own path. But you failed, and now the whole galaxy knows what you really are. Vorn's image flickered, his hand moving off screen. Probably to his pilot, ordering a course change, trying to run. Too late. The transmission cut off. Garrett pulled Lyra close. That was incredibly satisfying to watch. I've been practicing that speech in my head for the last 18 hours. You delivered it perfectly. They stood together on the bridge of the Ravager's hand, surrounded by pirates who'd become accidental allies waiting for the galaxy to catch up with the justice they just set in motion. 17 hours until Vorn arrived. 90 minutes until Council security, and a lifetime ahead of them if they could just survive one more confrontation. The Nithera's diplomatic vessel Harmonious Purpose dropped out of FTL 63 hours after Lyra's abduction, 17 hours after the evidence transmission, exactly when Vorn had promised delivery. Captain Thrace's crew had spent those 17 hours in a state of controlled chaos, confined to the cargo bay under the watchful supervision of Garrett's strategically placed surveillance equipment. They weren't prisoners, not exactly. More like witnesses waiting to testify, their futures balanced on the knife edge of cooperation. Lyra stood on the bridge watching the elegant ship materialize on the sensors. It was beautiful in the way Nithera's architecture always was, all flowing lines and bioluminescent panels that pulsed in harmonious patterns. A vessel designed for diplomacy, for cultural exchange, for the high-minded ideals her people claimed to embody. Now it carried executioners wearing the mask of ambassadors. Council security is still 43 minutes out, Garrett said from his position at the tactical console. He'd integrated himself into the ship's system so thoroughly that Thrace's crew had simply accepted him as part of the bridge complement. Vorn's early, probably trying to grab you and run before the authorities arrive. Let him dock, Lyra said. Her skin pulsed steady blue, the color of calm determination. I want to face him. Thrace looked up from the captain's chair, all four eyes narrowed. That's a bad tactical decision. We should delay docking, stall until Council security arrives. No, Lyra's voice carried absolute certainty. Running from him means he wins, means fear dictates my choices. I won't live that way. Garrett moved to her side, close enough that she could feel his warmth. You don't have to do this alone. I know, but I need to do it. She turned to face him, her hand finding his. You taught me to fight, to survive, to think strategically. But you also taught me that some battles aren't about survival. They're about standing for something larger than fear. This is one of those battles. His expression softened, just fractionally, the ghost mask slipping enough to show the man beneath. I'll be right beside you. Always beside, never in front. Always. The harmonious purpose sent a docking request. Lyra authorized it personally, her voice steady as she spoke into the communications channel. Docking approved. Welcome aboard, Uncle Vorn. I've been expecting you. The silence that followed was electric. Then Vorn's voice, tight with barely controlled fury. You've made a grave mistake, niece. Have I? Or have you? I suppose we'll find out. The docking clamps engaged with a metallic thud that resonated through the Ravager's hand's hull. Lyra straightened her robes, the ceremonial fabric the pirates had so carefully preserved. She'd put them on an hour ago, transforming herself from prisoner to dignitary. If she was going to confront the man who'd ordered her death, she'd do it looking like exactly what she was. A scholar, a researcher, a Nytheris citizen who'd done nothing wrong except fall in love. The airlock cycled open. 5 figures stepped aboard. 4 were standard diplomatic security, young Nytheris with military bearing barely concealed beneath formal robes. But the 5th was Vorn himself, and seeing him in person after 63 hours of anticipation hit Lyra like a physical blow. He looked older than she remembered, taller with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in harsh angular rhythms. The markings of authority, of righteousness, of absolute conviction in one's own moral superiority. He'd presided over family gatherings when she was young, had spoken eloquently about Nytheris cultural preservation, had seemed so wise and learned. She'd never noticed the cruelty in the set of his jaw, the cold calculation in his eyes. Elder Magistrate Vorn, Lyra said formally, her voice carrying across the docking bay. Thank you for coming. We have much to discuss. Vorn's light flickered surprise. He'd expected a cowering prisoner, she realized, someone broken and desperate. Instead, he found her standing straight, flanked by a human veteran, and surrounded by pirates who'd turned cooperative witness. Where is Captain Thrace? Vorn demanded, his voice carrying that multitonal harmonic quality that Nytheris used to project authority. Thrace stepped forward from the bridge entrance. Here, Magistrate, I regret to inform you that the contract terms have changed. Changed? You were hired to deliver cargo, not negotiate contracts. I was hired to commit murder. Was Thrace's forearms crossed over his massive chest. The contract you issued contains a witness elimination protocol. You were planning to kill my entire crew after transfer. That changes the nature of our agreement substantially. Vorn's markings pulsed irritated orange. Ridiculous. Show me this supposed protocol. Lyra activated the wall display. The contract appeared, highlighted sections glowing. Payment terms, delivery coordinates. And at the bottom, the damning clause about witness elimination. You see, Uncle, Lyra said quietly, your mistake was assuming pirates are stupid. They're not. They're survivors. And survivors read contracts very carefully. Vorn stared at the display, his skin cycling through rapid color changes. Surprise, anger, fear. He recovered quickly, but Lyra had spent 63 hours preparing for this moment. She'd mapped every likely response, anticipated every argument. This is a forgery, Vorn said. The preservation circle would never. The preservation circle doesn't know about this contract at all, does it? Lyra stepped closer. Because you issued it personally, used circle funds without authorization. Just like you've been embezzling from the circle's accounts for the past 4 years. 2.3 million credits, Uncle. That's what my research uncovered. That's why you really want me dead. The diplomatic security guards exchanged glances. Their emotional resonance bloomed with doubt, confusion. They'd been told this was a simple extraction, retrieving a citizen who'd been kidnapped. Nobody had mentioned assassination. Nobody had mentioned financial crimes. You have no proof, Vorn said, but his voice lacked conviction. Garrett spoke for the first time, his tone carrying the flat affect of ghost operational mode. We transmitted complete financial records to the Galactic Council 42 minutes ago. By now, Council auditors are probably tearing through the Preservation Circle's accounts. They'll find every credit you stole, every transaction you falsified, every lie you told. Vorn's gaze shifted to Garrett, his markings flaring contemptuous red. The human speaks. How appropriate. This contamination is exactly why you needed to be cleansed, niece. You've let this primitive influence corrupt your judgment, your loyalty to your people. He taught me to think for myself, Lyra said. To question authority that demands obedience without earning respect. To recognize that love isn't contamination, it's connection. You call him primitive, but he's shown me more compassion and integrity than you ever did. He's made you weak. No, Uncle. He's made me strong. Strong enough to stand here and face you. Strong enough to expose your crimes. Strong enough to choose my own path instead of the one you tried to force on me. Vorn's hand moved beneath his robes. Lyra's empathetic sense screamed warning a half second before she saw the weapon. A small plasma pistol designed for concealed carry. Diplomatic security protocols prohibited weapons, but apparently Vorn had decided protocols no longer applied. The pistol came up, aimed directly at Lyra's chest. Everything slowed. Garrett's hand moving toward his own weapon. Thrace's crew raising their guns. The diplomatic security guards frozen in shock, unsure whether to defend their magistrate or stop him from committing murder. But Lyra didn't flinch, didn't move, just stood there, meeting her uncle's gaze with perfect calm. Do it, she said quietly. Pull the trigger. Prove that everything I've said about you is true. Prove that your righteousness is just fear wearing a mask. Prove that the Preservation Circle is willing to murder its own citizens for the crime of choosing love. Vorn's hand shook. His bioluminescence cycled through chaotic patterns, emotions bleeding through his control. Rage, fear, desperation. The realization that he'd already lost, that killing her now would only confirm his guilt. You were supposed to be weak, he whispered. A scholar, soft, easily controlled. I'm a scholar, but scholarship isn't weakness. It's understanding. And I understand you, Uncle. I understand that you're not defending our culture. You're defending your power, your theft, your desperate need to believe you're righteous when you're just a criminal wearing ceremonial robes. The pistol wavered. Garrett's voice cut through the tension, calm and absolutely certain. Elder Magistrate, lower the weapon. Galactic Council security will arrive in 38 minutes. If you shoot her, they'll find you standing over her body with the murder weapon in your hand. There will be no trial, no defense. Just immediate arrest and life imprisonment for political assassination. Is that really how you want this to end? And if I don't shoot? Vorn's voice cracked. If I lower the weapon, then you face trial for embezzlement and conspiracy. Serious charges, but not murder. Possibility of a reduced sentence if you cooperate. Possibility of eventually seeing daylight again. Garrett paused. Your choice. Death or consequences. What's it going to be? The pistol lowered slowly. Vorn's arm dropped to his side, the weapon falling from nerveless fingers to clatter on the deck plating. His light faded to dull gray-green, the color of defeat. I did it for our people, he said, but there was no conviction in it. Just the hollow echo of a rationalization he'd told himself so many times it had worn smooth with repetition. No, Lyra said. You did it for yourself, for money, for power, for the fear that our people might evolve beyond the narrow boundaries you tried to enforce. But we're evolving anyway, Uncle. With or without your permission. with or without your approval. And my relationship with Garrett is proof that love transcends the limits small minds try to impose. One of the diplomatic security guards, a young Netheris with patterns that suggested junior status, stepped forward and retrieved Vorn's weapon. Elder Magistrate Vorn, I'm placing you under provisional custody pending council security arrival. You have the right to remain silent. I know my rights, Vorn snapped. Then his shoulders slumped. I know my rights. The next 38 minutes passed in tense silence. Vorn sat in the corner of the docking bay, guarded by his own security detail, while Lyra and Garrett stood at the viewport watching the stars. Captain Thrace had retreated to the bridge with his crew, giving the moment the privacy it deserved. You were incredible, Garrett said quietly. The way you faced him. No fear, just absolute conviction. I was terrified, Lyra admitted. Her skin pulsed honest violet. My hands were shaking. My hearts were racing. I kept thinking he was going to shoot, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. But you didn't show it. You stood there and made him choose. That's courage, Lyra. Real courage isn't the absence of fear. It's being afraid and acting anyway. She leaned against him, drawing warmth from his solid presence. 3 years ago, I would have broken down, would have begged, would have given him anything he wanted just to survive. 3 years ago, you hadn't been trained by a stubborn ghost operative who refused to let you be a victim. 3 years ago, I hadn't fallen in love with a man who saw strength in me I didn't know I had. And they stood together in silence, watching the stars, until the Galactic Council security cruiser arrived in a flash of blue-white engine wash. Commander Zealous was a Corin, methodical and professional, with the kind of calm competence that came from decades of law enforcement experience. She boarded the Ravager's hand with a full tactical team, assessed the situation in approximately 45 seconds, and took command with the efficiency of someone who'd handled political conspiracies before. Elder Magistrate Vorn, she said, her voice carrying absolute authority. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit political assassination, embezzlement of public funds, abuse of diplomatic authority, and attempted murder. Your diplomatic immunity has been revoked by council order as of 23 minutes ago. Vorn didn't resist, just stood slowly, allowed himself to be restrained, walked toward the council ship with the mechanical movements of someone in shock. He paused as he passed Lyra. You were my favorite niece, he said quietly. Bright, curious, everything I hoped the next generation would be. Until I chose my own path. Until you chose wrong. Lyra met his gaze. No, Uncle, I chose love. You chose fear. History will judge which of us was right. Vorn had no answer to that. Commander Zealous's team escorted him away. Zealous turned to Lyra. Scholar Lyra, the Council extends formal apologies for the actions of extremist elements within Netheris society. Measures are being implemented to prevent this from happening again. What kind of measures? Full audit of the Preservation Circle. Criminal investigation into every member of its leadership. Public disclosure of all financial irregularities. And formal recognition that relationships between Netheris citizens and other species are protected under Council law, with severe penalties for anyone who attempts to interfere. Lyra's bioluminescence pulsed surprise blue. That's comprehensive. The Council takes political assassination attempts seriously, especially when they target our own citizens for the crime of falling in love. Zealous's expression softened slightly. Your testimony will be crucial in dismantling the extremist networks, but that can wait. You've been through enough for one day. She turned to Captain Thrace. As for you and your crew, you'll be detained for formal testimony. Given your cooperation and the circumstances, I'm recommending minimal charges, probably time served and community service. You made the right choice siding with the victim. Thrace's mandibles clicked, relieved acknowledgement. Thank you, Commander. We're not murderers, just people who took the wrong job. Then let's make sure you take better jobs in the future. The Council security team efficiently processed the scene, taking statements, collecting evidence, securing the Ravager's hand for transport to the nearest Council station. Through it all, Lyra and Garrett stood together, answering questions when asked, providing support when needed, but mostly just being present for each other. As the last of the security team filed out, Zealous approached them one final time. Where will you go now? Lyra looked at Garrett. Garrett looked at Lyra. They smiled simultaneously. Home, they said together. Montana. We have a wedding to plan. 3 months later, the rebuilt Montana Research Outpost Sierra 9 stood against the backdrop of the Rocky Mountains, its new construction gleaming in autumn sunlight. The observation deck had been converted into a ceremonial space, panoramic windows offering views of Glacier National Park's peaks painted gold and crimson by the setting sun. Lyra stood in traditional Nithera ceremonial robes, fabric flowing around her like liquid light, her bioluminescent markings pulsing in patterns that communicated joy so pure it needed no translation. She'd spent the morning with her sister and the few family members who'd supported her relationship from the beginning, preparing for this moment with the kind of careful attention to detail that came naturally to someone whose life's work involved understanding emotional resonance. Garrett waited at the makeshift altar, wearing formal Terran clothing that felt restrictive after years in research station casuals. His best man, Marcus, a fellow former ghost operative who'd traveled 3-star systems to attend, stood beside him with barely concealed amusement. "You look terrified," Marcus whispered. "I've infiltrated hostile vessels with better odds of survival," Garrett admitted. "Marriage is scarier than combat?" "At least in combat, I know the rules of engagement." The music began, a fusion of Terran strings and Nithera's harmonic resonance that seemed to make the air itself vibrate with anticipation. The assembled guests, a mix of humans and Nitheras, turned toward the entrance. Lyra appeared, attended by her sister and by Council Elder Thessa, the Nitheras official who championed their relationship from the beginning, who'd argued in council chambers that love transcending species boundaries was something to celebrate, not suppress. Garrett's breath caught. He'd seen Lyra in countless contexts over the past 3 years. In the greenhouse covered in soil, in her research lab analyzing empathetic resonance patterns, in tactical training sessions, learning how to fight, in the cell aboard the Ravager's hand, conducting psychological warfare from captivity. But this was different. This was Lyra transformed into something radiant, her skin glowing in rhythms that spoke of commitment and joy and the promise of shared futures. She moved down the aisle with liquid grace, her eyes never leaving his, and Garrett understood for perhaps the first time the full weight of what they were doing. This wasn't just a ceremony, it was a statement, a declaration that love was stronger than fear, that connection mattered more than cultural purity, that two beings from different worlds could build something beautiful together. Lyra reached his side, took his scarred hands in her cool fingers. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi," he whispered back. Elder Thessa stepped forward, her bioluminescence pulsing formal gold. "We gather today to witness the union of two souls who have chosen each other against all obstacles. Lyra of Nitheris, scholar of empathetic resonance, seeker of understanding. Garrett Aldrich of Earth, protector, teacher, warrior who chose peace." The ceremony was a fusion of traditions, Nithera's harmonic singing that made the windows vibrate, Terran vows spoken in English and carefully approximated Nithera's phonemes, the exchange of symbols, a bioluminescent crystal from Lyra's world, and a folded steel ring from Garrett's. When it came time for the voiceduos, Lyra spoke first, her multi-tonal voice carrying across the observation deck. "I was an observer before I met you, Garrett. Safe, detached, studying emotions instead of experiencing them, analyzing relationships from academic distance instead of risking my own heart. You showed me that feeling deeply isn't weakness, that vulnerability is the foundation of real strength, that opening myself to another person is the bravest thing I could do." Her light patterns shifted through a spectrum of colors, each one carrying meaning. "You taught me to fight when the galaxy tried to make me a victim. You taught me to stand firm when powerful people demanded I conform. You taught me that I could be both scholar and warrior, both gentle and strong, both Nitherus and something more. I vow to stand beside you, to challenge you when you need challenging, to support you when you need support, and to demonstrate every day that love transcends every boundary fear tries to impose." Garrett's turn. He took a breath, steadying himself, then spoke in the voice that was neither ghost nor researcher, but simply himself. "I was a weapon before I met you, Lyra. Efficient, cold, purpose-built for violence. I'd spent 10 years as exactly what I was trained to be, and I was good at it. Too good. I thought that was all I could ever be. that the ghost had killed anything soft or gentle in me, that I was fundamentally broken in ways that couldn't be fixed. His hands tightened on hers. Then I met a brilliant, curious, compassionate scholar who looked past the armor and saw something worth saving. You showed me I could be more than my training, that the skills I'd learned to destroy could be used to protect, that the discipline that made me an effective soldier could make me a better partner. That violence wasn't the only language I spoke. His voice roughened with emotion. You anchored me to my humanity when I'd forgotten what humanity meant. You proved that a weapon could become a guardian, that a ghost could become a man, that someone who'd spent a decade learning to kill could spend the rest of his life learning to love. I vow to protect you, to honor you, to teach you everything I know while learning everything you have to teach me, and to spend every day proving that the most dangerous force in the universe isn't a warship or a weapon. It's two people who refuse to let anything separate them. Elder Thessa's bioluminescence flared brilliant white. By the authority vested in me by the Galactic Council and the Niththeris Council of Elders, I declare you partners in union. May your bond strengthen both your peoples and serve as proof that love knows no boundaries. You may kiss, Marcus added helpfully from the side. Garrett pulled Lyra close. Their lips met, human warmth and Niththeris cool, and her bioluminescence exploded in patterns of pure joy that lit the entire observation deck. The assembled guests erupted in applause, cheers in a dozen languages, the sound of two communities coming together to celebrate something larger than cultural difference. The reception was everything a fusion wedding should be. Human music and Niththeris harmonic compositions. Food from Earth and delicacies from Lyra's homeworld. Speeches that ranged from heartfelt to hilarious, including one from Captain Thrace via recorded message, who sent his congratulations from the community service he was performing at a council rehabilitation facility. As evening fell and the observation deck's lights dimmed to let the stars shine through, Lyra and Garrett stepped onto a private balcony, needing a moment away from the celebration. We did it, Lyra said, leaning against the railing, looking out at the Montana wilderness. We did, Garrett agreed, standing beside her. Survived kidnapping, conspiracy, assassination attempts, and a wedding ceremony. Which was hardest? Wedding, definitely the wedding. She laughed, her skin pulsing amused teal. You've faced armed enemies with less fear. Armed enemies, I understand. Wedding ceremony expectations? Terrifying unknown. They stood in comfortable silence, watching stars appear as darkness deepened. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. The mountains stood eternal and indifferent, having witnessed countless human dramas and Niththeris ceremonies, and now this strange hybrid of both. Do you think they'll try again? Lyra asked quietly. The extremists, the people who think we're wrong. Probably. Vorn's in prison, but the Preservation Circle had other members. Some will have learned from what happened. Others will double down on hatred. Garrett's arm went around her shoulders, but they'll face something they didn't account for. What's that? A scholar who knows how to fight back. A partnership built on mutual respect instead of power imbalance. And a precedent that says political assassination of council citizens carries severe consequences. We've changed the equation, chucked Lyra, made it harder for the next person who wants to enforce cultural purity through violence. So we're symbols now? Representatives of interspecies cooperation? We're just two people in love. The symbolism is what others project onto us. But if our existence makes it easier for the next mixed couple, if some young Niththeris or human sees us and realizes they don't have to choose between love and cultural identity, then I'm okay with being a symbol. Lyra turned to face him fully, her hands on his chest. I'm scared sometimes. Not of you, never of you, but of the responsibility. Of knowing people are watching, judging, using our relationship to score political points or advance agendas. Then we live our lives as honestly as we can. We don't try to be perfect representatives of anything except ourselves. We fight when we need to fight, we show mercy when we can, and we prove through our actions that love isn't contamination or weakness or betrayal. It's just love, the most human and most Niththeris thing either of us can do. Her bioluminescence pulsed soft violet, the color of deep affection. When did you become a philosopher? When I fell in love with a scholar. It was inevitable. Inside, the celebration continued, music and laughter and the sound of two communities learning to exist together. Outside, under Montana's stars, two beings from different worlds held each other and understood that they'd accomplished something rare and precious. They'd chosen each other, despite opposition, despite danger, despite every rational reason to walk away. And in choosing each other, they'd proved that the universe was larger than the small minds who tried to divide it. That love was stronger than fear. That connection mattered more than conformity. The pirates who'd captured Lyra had underestimated her because she was a scholar. They'd underestimated Garrett because he'd left the Ghost program. They'd thought kidnapping would be simple, delivery straightforward, consequences minimal. They'd learned that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one with the gun. Sometimes it's the one with the brilliant mind, the empathetic abilities, and the training from someone who loves them enough to make sure they never have to be a victim. And they'd learned that veterans don't stop being dangerous when they retire. They just become dangerous in more focused, more precise, more devastating ways. But most of all, they'd learned what Garrett and Lyra had known from the beginning. That love, real love, the kind built on mutual respect and shared struggle and absolute commitment, was the most powerful force in the galaxy. And nothing, not pirates or extremists, or political conspiracies or cultural prejudice, could stand against it forever. The stars wheeled overhead, the celebration continued, and two souls who'd found each other across the void held tight to what they'd built together, knowing that whatever came next, they'd face it the way they'd faced everything else. Together. Always together.